all join me in a prayer. It's an excerpt from A Woman's Book of Money and Spiritual Vision by Rosemary Williams. So let's read it together. Holy One, sustainer of all things, give me the courage to look at my financial life with clear sight. Give me the strength to merge the beliefs of my soul with the realities of my money. Give me the knowledge to know what true wealth is and how to use it. Guide my hands, my head, and my heart to the facts and figures of my financial life. Open my spirit to the transformation and freedom that the knowledge of those details can bring. Prepare my soul for using money wisely in ways that can truly enrich me and those around me in the world. Expand my vision to help me see that the difficulties and challenges of my life are my teachers. Encourage me as I connect my financial resources to my health, vocation, and spiritual being. Help me to understand that all my resources, talents, money, and blessing of family and friends are part of the never-ending love you provide for me. Amen. Now, I think the songs we've been singing, the scripture, and that prayer, I'm done. I'm not really sure I need to add anything else. But if you will bear with me, I will offer a couple more thoughts. Sonia was teasing me about, she said, I know you're not going to stay behind the podium, and I'm not. And I'm probably going to come into the audience, so be prepared if I tap you, I might need your assistance in some questions. When I was thinking about sort of a compilation of my life, I was looking at some key experiences I had, and then last night I looked at these again through the lens of debt. And I thought about the debt of Boston College, the debt of University of Vermont, the debt of Seattle University, and thought about how even to do that which we're called to do, the amount of money we're paying to do that can sometimes hinder what's on the other side. And then based on your family system and who you are and how you were raised, not only is this system in you trying to move yourself forward, but over in the corner is my sister, who decided for some odd reason in her teenage years that she wanted to come live with me just a few years before it was time to pay her college tuition. And for some reason, my mother was very happy to make sure that she went along and did that. So the commitments that I have, I grew up in Chicago, went to these various schools. My current life is serving in the Iowa, Nebraska, and South Dakota Conference. To my shock, a few years ago, I was invited to lead and sort of create the Minister's Financial Vitality Initiative. And why it was a shock to me, because at the moment when I was invited to be a part of this, I thought, I am definitely not the person to be talking to anybody about finances and financial well-being. And the reason why is because I was so overcome by these numbers and spreadsheets and how do you do the best budget and which app is most appropriate to use. And I thought, that's just not me. And so I had to challenge myself to understand that my financial vitality was not just about the apps and the spreadsheets, but it was a foundational understanding of well-being. We do not often put our financial life as a part of our well-being, the same way we might think about eating differently or going to the gym or therapy or different things like that. Our finances are kind of that thing over there that maybe we've historically been taught not to pay attention to. But my invitation today is to think about your financial vitality as a central and critical part of your overall wellness. Which means that the same way that you might invest in your physical health, in your spiritual health, in your mental health, you might also think about investing in your financial health and wellness. I'm going to begin our conversation talking to you about pastoral debt crisis. It's a crisis that I think the Lilly Endowment, the seminaries, churches, a number of donors, folks are getting involved in because they realize that the reality of pastoral debt and the crisis it's creating, that same mentality floods into the church as the pastor attempts to lead, and it also detracts from our ability to truly serve in the vocation in which we've been called. If you're stressed about how you're going to pay rent, that's probably going to impact this amazing, joyful sermon that you're preaching on Sunday. And it also might creep into, your pastoral care, because you're wondering how are we going to build a ministry to sort of help those who are homeless when I'm thinking that I might be.
Right.
Because the reality of how I'm going to make sense out of this don't work. I apologize, this is probably going to be very small, but I'll read it out to you. 75% of pastors report being extremely stressed or highly stressed. It's not a typo. 75%. 90% work between 55 to 75 hours per week. And I want you to think about it, because people think, well, how is that possible? Often for pastors, calls all in the middle of the night. Text messages all throughout your day. Even when you're saying, okay, I'm in the middle of this, or this is my Sabbath day. How many of you know Crisis does not care that it's your Sabbath day? And so 50 to 75 hours a week. 90% feel fatigued and worn out every week. Not just during Holy Week, not just during Advent, but every week. 70% say that they're grossly underpaid. I've been trying to find out where the 30% are, but 70% feel that they are grossly underpaid. 40% report a serious conflict with a parishioner once a month. A serious conflict with a parishioner. And then 80% will not be in ministry 10 years later. So imagine the folks graduating from Eden who are excited about ministry and what their life and their call might be. Statistically, 80% will not be. Some of them won't really continue this after the 5 years. Literally because of the financial reality. The financial reality of realizing that there is no way that I'm going to be able to functionally live, pay off all of my student loan debt, and serve a particular congregation where the resources are continuously declining. The average pastor's salary is about $48,000 a year. And that's inclusive of a number of different things, depending on how your breakdown is, the church you're serving, the area of the country that you're living in. Most U.S. clergy make under $50,000 a year. Less than 20% of all clergy make over $80,000 a year. If you're part of the United Church of Christ and you've looked at any conference compensation guidelines, you will understand exactly why this is really a reality of only 80% really making that very small amount, and a very small percentage of Big Tent church pastors who will be able to supersede that amount. I'm doing a great job with this clicker. Dr. David Wang, he was invited by Lilly to do a presentation that I was just said in December, and he's doing research at Talbot on shame and economic challenges. And here's just some things I borrowed from his research that's still in process. Seminary students physiologically have fewer hours of sleep, overall poor health, and poor stress management. This is all about as they are thinking about the debt they're going to graduate with. This is what he was researching. Lower school satisfaction, lower GPA, depressed mood and general anxiety, relationship satisfaction, lower relationship satisfaction, lower satisfaction with family and friends, and lower levels of support overall, partly because of a withdrawal. Not even wanting to think about it, don't want to talk about it, don't want to focus on it. So this sense of withdrawing within yourself as you're thinking about the amount of debt you will have to pay. And then lastly, spirituality, a tendency to avoid God. Imagine that. I'm leaving to go serve, but I don't want to talk to God. Because God, how have you put me in the situation where I'm worried about if I'm going to be able to survive doing this thing that I believe you've called me to do? And so he did an assessment of folks' prayer life, of their investment in scriptural study outside of an academic reality. And what he found in his research is that folks came into seminary far more rooted and grounded in their faith than the way they left. And it wasn't just because the courses helped us sort of tear everything down. So it was also because of a sense of bewilderment. How will I survive? How will I move forward? And God, where are you in this? The proverbial, my God, why hast thou forsaken taken me because I can't move forward in this situation. Money messages. We are servants called to do the ministry God is calling us toward. As a servant leader, money is not a motivating factor. I do this for God, not for what I will be paid. I hear that over and over from folks who are entering seminary, from folks who are graduating, and folks who have served in the congregation, struggling in the same financial reality that other people are being welcomed into, but this moniker is still there. Money doesn't grow on trees. We've heard that before. It's better to give than to receive. A penny saved is a penny earned. What are some other money messages you heard growing up?
It's better to give than receive.
That's there. Give me a couple more. Other messages you heard about money.
God loves a cheerful giver.
Yeah, God loves a cheerful giver.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Robin.
Mama may have, Papa may have.
We all have been curated with different messages. One that I was talking to a financial planner about recently is you can't save and be in debt at the same time. The money you're saving, where are you putting that if the debt is also insurmountable and constantly growing? You know, there's these seeds that have been planted in us, planted in our minds, and that is the way. Some of our message, delayed gratification is best. You don't need to do those things right now. Just wait. At some point in your life, you will be able to do this. And it's things like that that curate our understanding. So how have we been socialized financially? How have we been socialized to think about money and our relationship to it? Some of them is just these blanket statements that have been made, but most of us never had a sit-down conversation within the context of our family or friends or other people where you were able to have a realistic and honest conversation about money, because most of us have been taught that's not something you talk about. It's indelicate. It's inappropriate. You don't bring it up. And it's usually in this thing of like, you never want to lord yourself over someone else or make somebody else feel less because you have more, when the truth of the matter is you just don't want people to know how much you're struggling. And so we don't talk about it, and we hide these realities. The next case is familial legacy. This is a wonderful picture of my grandmother, and this is just some of the spread that she made over the holiday season. My grandmother is a central figure in my life. She was the invitation to me spiritually. She nurtured and curated my call to ministry, and she taught me a lot of lessons about service, servitude, and how you give yourself. One of the things I learned from my grandmother is when you are hosting, you do not eat until everyone else has eaten. So as a child, I watched my grandmother cook all this food. She'd be cooking for days and days, baking cakes, putting this in the oven, curating this. And I noticed I never really saw her eat. If she did, it would be a small little plate off to the side, and she would just eat a little bit because she wanted to make sure that everyone else who was invited ate. And if she didn't eat, if she didn't get anything, she would always say, "Oh, I'm fine." Or her classic moniker was, "Well, I've been nibbling all while I've been doing this." What was that teaching me? Now, I celebrated it because for years and years, I hosted all the time. I was reflecting on 2 years ago, I had a 4th of July party at my house with 70 people. And I don't think I got a rib. I don't think I got anything. And it was fine. You know, it was the most amazing party that I could have possibly had, because why? Everyone else was satisfied. What my grandmother was teaching me about hospitality is that to be hospitable, you only deserve nibbles. To be hospitable, you better not even get a plate. To be hospitable, it is about the external, not about the internal. Now, of course, my grandmother would be mortified if she was at this presentation and hearing me say this, because she was only doing what had been taught to her. So the way that I curated stewardship at a 4th of July party, you better believe that's how I was curating my pastoral ministry. Times where I needed to take care of things for myself and my own family, but the church was in need, and how dare I assume I deserved a plate? How dare I assume I deserve any kind of attention, not only personally, but definitely not financially. The church was in need of something, as Sonia told you, I was a church start pastor. So you better know that for the first, let me tell you, this is how delusional my understanding of service was. For the first 2 years of my church start ministry, we never collected offering. Now, the backdrop, you want to be like, because God will provide. No. It was poor budgeting and poor planning. I happened to be a church start pastor who was also the dean of students at a university. I felt financially, it'll be my tithe to pay for everything. Well, for 2 years, all of the first members of my church had no understanding of how to sow into a ministry. They had no understanding of financial stewardship. They had no understanding of that this was a part of their work. And so when folks couldn't rally to get things done, I was in shock. What have you been doing? Well, I modeled for them, it's the pastor's responsibility to take care of all of this. Now, I can say, well, I was a church start pastor, so maybe I didn't know. But I've talked to settled pastors of churches that have been around for longer than I've been alive, and the pastor is still nickeling and diming themselves trying to figure out how to make this thing work because they didn't deserve a plate. I started thinking about this. Now, maybe people think it's rude, but now when I'm hosting an event at my house, I make sure to make my plate first. I think I bought all this food, I cooked all this food, I'm going to eat all of this food, which you can probably tell. But the point is, it is this sense that we have to change our understanding. So from a familial perspective, always serve someone else first. What about this biblical perspective? Let's just read this passage. Then Jesus came from Galilee to John at the Jordan River to be baptized. But John tried to prevent him, vigorously protesting, saying, "It is I who need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me?" But Jesus replied to him, "Permit it just now, for this is the fitting way for us to fulfill all righteousness." Then John permitted it and baptized him. After Jesus was baptized, he came up immediately out of the water, and behold, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending as a dove, lighting on him, Jesus. And behold, a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased and delighted." For those of you who love theology and theological inquiry, how many miracles have been done before this moment? How many sermons preached? How many crowds of 5,000? None. The fascinating part of this is we tell you things like, Jesus paid it all. You have to give everything, sacrifice even as Christ did. And yet, theologically here, before any work was done, God was already saying, "I'm pleased. You are my child, my beloved, before you do anything. In you, I am well pleased, before you've done anything. In you, I delight." What would happen if in your seminary reality, you realized, before I ever preach my first sermon, I'm delight for God? Before I do my baptism or my first confirmation class, before I accept my first call, God is already pleased with me. It's a theological change that then allows you to also think, well then, if I'm beloved, if God is already well pleased, and my worth is not defined by what I do, then you also might show up to a call agreement conversation with a very different mentality than if you showed up like, "Please just give me the ability to serve at any cost because I need God to be pleased with me." Just if somebody just gives me a plate have to do something for God to love me. Rooted and grounded in why we struggle financially is societal things. It's the little messages, it's our family, but it's also our theology. What if every time somebody suggested a call, we read the scripture? Every time somebody declared a call to ministry, we reminded me of this. Part of my role as the Associate Conference Minister is often to preach installations, and I always preach the scripture. Because I want the pastor to know and the congregation to know your pastor isn't earning God's love. Your pastor isn't earning God's pleasure. Your pastor isn't earning God's delight. It actually already exists. Now the rest of this is just the cherry on top. Because it renegotiates how we define ourselves and what we are worthy of and how we ask for what we need. One of the critical parts of this financial crisis is the inability to declare and name that which you need. That which you need to survive, that which you need to move forward, that which will allow you to functionally, fully show up as a pastoral leader. And I want to push against the supposition that, well, churches just don't have it because it's declining income everywhere and these things just don't work. I pastored a church, and I won't say the particular name of this church, but I pastored a church where I was sitting in a meeting where the council was deciding whether or not we should buy a $2,000 floor cleaner. $2,000 to just clean the floor because, they just wanted to make sure that the tiles on the floor were as shiny as they possibly could be. And almost 5 minutes later, we were having a negotiation about whether or not they could really pay the full percentage of my pension. And because of how we've situated church, it was perfectly normalized that those conversations would happen at the same time. Now, as the settled pastor, I left going, am I not worth more than a floor cleaner? But imagine the consciousness inside of a church that weekly said, we love you. Oh my God, you're the best pastor. We just adore you. But $2,000 floor cleaner, ooh, the pension is just getting so pricey. And the declining pledges are I don't know if we can really make that kind of ask. That's about situating ourselves in a new theological approach where then you can advocate for yourself differently. When I left, I was still serving my church start, but I was pastoring a settled church. And my background was in university administration. And one of the first things we were taught in graduate school is you never accept the first offer. It's just not a real offer. You're going to be lowballed or something else, so you push back. So I got my call agreement from my nice, shiny 125-year anniversary UCC church, and I redlined all of it and sent it back. And the council wrote back and said, I don't believe in the 125 years anyone has ever sent the call agreement back. So we're going to have to meet because we don't know how to respond. No one's ever sent it back. And then I thought, oh, maybe I did something that you're not supposed to do in this context. The council wrote back, approved all of the red lines. And they said, we just didn't know. Crazy things like my vacation time, how it was curated and orchestrated, things about salary that had nothing to do with conference guidelines, made up things about a pension that they just didn't know. They were like, well, the previous person did, so we just added to this and then moved forward. And it was only in the self-advocacy that the church realized, oh, maybe we might want to do something different. So for the next settled pastor who came after me, the negotiation was totally different. The council sent the contract and said, hey, if there's anything you want us to change, anything you need us to help us, let us know. That pastor reached out to me and said, hey, can you send me a copy of your call agreement? Because I just want to make sure that we're all... It was a different cultural reality simply because of the self-advocacy of worth. They could have come back and said, we can't do this. But the point, the ministry was in the ask. And how, as ministers and those who train ministers and so forth, how do we implant the desire to have the ask, the push, the narrative that I deserve to live. I deserve to be financially vital. And what does that look like? Third thing, So we talked about family and society. We talked about theology, now our mindset. You have to ask yourself, are we in a mindset of scarcity or a mindset of sufficiency? Scarcity or sufficiency? When you hear scarcity, never enough, emptiness, fear, lacking, you're always afraid something is going to happen. Most of our clergy are walking into a setting every Sunday praying that the offering plate balances out something so that the church can be in the black at annual meeting, because Lord knows you don't want to get up talking about yet another deficit. So scarcity. Factual scarcity. And what we found in some of the research that David Wong was doing with actual people who are settled clergy was that often when clergy felt that they were in a place of scarcity, they started using heightened theological language that they didn't believe. God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that we can ask or think, but not believing it, because it's like, I'm just afraid to tell you that I'm so scared. And so they found that their theological language did not match what they were actually feeling, because the language just became something you say to hopefully make other people feel better than you currently feel. Sufficiency. You think of things like gratitude, fulfillment, love, trust, respect, contributing, faith, compassion. But how many of our churches are talking about sufficiency? Now, the other subtext that we're all in is this understanding of a capitalist understanding in a Western context of I need to be prosperous. And there is a difference between sufficiency and prosperity. Prosperity is I need even more than I have, and more than I have access to, and I need what you have, and I need what you have, and I'm measuring myself up against all of you, and somehow I'm less than if I don't have as much as you have. Gather, 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 gather. That's prosperity. Sufficiency is, do I have enough? We're sending pastors into congregations where they don't have enough. So you can't have a prosperity conversation if you can't have a sufficiency conversation. What will be sufficient in order for me to move forward? And how would that affect our giving? If your church budget was about sufficiency, church ministry was about sufficiency. I was talking to a pastor recently who pastors 2 churches, and they're doing robust ministry. I mean, changing lives in the city in this amazing way. And they're always struggling. Church cannot barely pay its rent, but it's doing amazing ministry. So I talked to the pastor, and I said, what would happen if your ministries were sufficient to the scale of what the people in your pews are actually able to contribute? Pastor went, but then we wouldn't do this, and we wouldn't do this, and we didn't do that. And I said, and who would judge you? Because right now you're doing all those things, and then this church will not exist. Which will mean that all of the things you're doing will also not exist. And so, do you do ministry at the cost of then the ministry completely ends? Or do you sow into the ministry, stabilize it in terms of the ministry, so that you are sufficient, the ministry is sufficient, you have curated ministries that will be sufficient, and they will be long-term and lasting. So that the community that you serve is also now not in scarcity. Because if the community that you serve, because you have 50 programs, and now they're worried that all 50 programs will go away because you guys can't pay your mortgage payment, then you're still in scarcity and not sufficiency. So again, how do we change our mentality from scarcity to sufficiency? Lilly Twist writes a beautiful book called The Soul of Money. The Soul of Money. And here's just some suppositions that she offers. When you let go of trying to get more of what you don't need, it frees up energy to make a difference in what you have. When you make a difference with what you have, it expands. When you choose to, and that's what I mean by the church, with the ministry, the 50 ministries, like having 5 that you do really well and are sufficiently meeting the needs of the community is actually more important than 50 that will not be sustained and then will ultimately end. Sufficiency is not an amount or quantity of anything, it is an experience, a context we generate, a declaration, a knowing that there is enough, that we are enough. That there is enough, and we are enough. Imagine that all of the ministry that folks are trying to generate is again because God is still not yet pleased. So he needs to do more. He needs to be on more boards, needs to preach more places, needs to have more community outreach, needs to do more, because God has not sent that dove yet. And so I'm pleased. So I'm going to keep doing it, but we are enough. Sufficiency does not mean that we should not strive or aspire. We can continue to earn and save, invest, and provide, but we frame our relationship with money with a new appreciation for what we already have. So coming to the table again with what do I need here to be functional, to be thriving, to be able to move forward so that I'm fine. How do I orchestrate my life and my requests around those things? And then my negotiations and how I move forward with churches or my calls or whomever is situated in that reality. I might get in trouble for this. What if seminaries created a tuition-based understanding on sufficiency?
Right? Yes.
I mean, that's not about Eden, right? That's just about everybody else. Well, what if?
We have more students.
So think about that. I mean, as a university administrator at Seattle U, I was a part of every financial conversation about financial aid and the company we've hired to give us thoughts about what we should do with financial aid. And I used to always think about the fact that we just paid $300,000 for these people to tell us what percentage that we should discount the financial aid. That's $300,000 that could have been in the scholarships and everything else. But this is just the business of how we function. Scarcity versus sufficiency. We clearly don't have what we need, so we should invite somebody else to tell us what we actually technically know. But we don't believe in ourselves. We don't believe in our skill sets. We don't believe in the brain trust that's around us. So we're scarce. Sufficiency alters the reality. So what happens when clergy invest in their wellness? What happens when there is a thought about sufficiency and not scarcity? What happens when people know that God is already pleased? 70% of the pastors said if they had to do it over again, they would still choose to pastor. When the mentality changes, when the energy changes, when their focus around their own sense of self-worth changes, their job satisfaction and investment changes. 57% say that they are happy and fulfilled as a pastor. 65% say that they do not battle depression. 74% are no longer overly fatigued. I found the 74% curious because when you look more into what was really going on, people learned to say things like, no, I'm actually not available. They learn weird phrases, which how dare you say in a church, like today is actually my Sabbath. I'd love to get back to you tomorrow.
Yep. No, you can't host your movie.
And yes, the church has probably got a little like, well, what are you talking about? But we realized that actually the education, when pastors started getting healthier and started naming their boundaries, then members started doing the same thing. And people realized, oh my God, I'm at church, I'm on this committee, I'm trying to do this and and my family has not seen me. And they actually detest my church because they feel like my church is more important than them. So then council members start saying, yeah, we're not going to meet from 7 to midnight. Talking about the same budgetary item that really we already know the answer to. No, we're actually not going to have another council meeting to negotiate X, Y, Z. It started to culturally change how people thought about themselves and how they showed up because the pastor learned how. Or I'm not available. Or that doesn't work for me. When I was in a conference staff, my conference minister had a voicemail that said, hi, if you're calling me and it's a Monday, today is my Sabbath day, so I won't be listening to voicemail and I will not return your call, but I will start returning calls on Tuesday. Please be in mind, I probably have a series of calls from Monday that I will have to address, and then I will start working on Tuesday, probably Wednesday. Now, I know this is the most fascinating and crazy message that I had ever heard, because it was inappropriate in my mind that he might set a boundary. And then lay out the boundary. How dare you? My thing is so important on Tuesday, it cannot wait till Wednesday. But it was a seed. So then, whether I liked it or not, I knew, let me not call him Monday, child, because he's gonna have to get through all of Monday before he gets to Tuesday. But I started to respect the boundary. Monday was a no-go. He valued his personal time enough to say, look, I am not sure that there's going to be emergency big enough on that Monday for me to listen to your voicemail. So you're welcome to call. And later, we were sitting down when I was thinking about doing conference ministry, and I said, okay, you cannot tell me that on Mondays, he said, Darrell, I have to tell you, people really don't call with major things on Mondays. They don't. Because they realize if they want an answer, if they want investment, it's going to have to be Tuesday or later in the week. And so he shifted a culture. Now, I haven't gotten bold enough yet to do that voicemail. Pray for me. We preach about the things we need to do in our own lives. But I'm becoming more and more comfortable with saying, Monday's my Sabbath day. That's not a functional business day. When we think about money and the budgetary reality, why it becomes so difficult for us is because as I started this by saying, we have these things in our mind about, well, this is just so complicated, or this is so hard, how do I do it? Part of my job with the pension boards is we work with Ernst & Young financial planners. And they have come up for our pastors with some very low bar, simple things that you can engage in, and I'm going to briefly share it with you. The first thing they say is most of us have no goals around budgetary things. We have goals like, oh, I have a house, or I'm a child, or I'm going to buy a new car. They're kind of amorphous, but they're not goals. Like, I want to spend no more than this amount on that. So then, what's my plan to accomplish that goal based on how much I've now curated and said I need? If I really have this much debt, then what is the kind of job and the salary I would need to be able to, we talk about that theoretically, but most of us don't sit down to do that. So they say, one of your first little chips at this financial mountain is to just set a goal. And maybe it's not a whole lot of goals about a lot of different things, because you're just moving yourself into it. Because it's often the lack of a goal that makes the reality of financial vitality insurmountable. When I first called my financial planner, I was talking about credit card debt. And I declared and decreed, I know my budget, I know how much money I have every month. There is no way that I can pay this credit card debt out. The financial planner says, girl, you'll have that debt paid off by November. I'm like, okay, clearly you are in a fictitious world and land that does not align with my life. And so she said, look, you need to do this. I looked at your, because part of the financial planning was you have to send them your bank statements and every quote embarrassing thing and show every Starbucks coffee I purchased and every foolish thing that I did and ridiculous money on food and everything else. So she said, okay, I looked at your overall spending. Here are some patterns that you might want to be aware of. And if you actually just did a little bit on these patterns, not life-changing things, just a little bit on these patterns, you'll be finished by November. In that year of conversation, I was finished with all of my credit card debt by October. What changed? It was my mindset, because I just couldn't even see it. It was like a forest. And this person came in and said, actually, there's a clear, thorough way, and it isn't going to kill you. It won't maim you. You won't lose your sense of self. You're not going to be like, I'm making ramen every day, Lord, just to make this work. But it was some changes. Changes I wasn't even aware of, because again, I've been taught don't pay attention to money, but my problem was I was actually not paying attention to money. It was like, oh Lord Jesus, okay, that bill cleared, good, okay, if this happened, great. Versus a goal. The goal she gave me, that was the only goal, to be transparent in that year, was pay your credit card debt off. We're not gonna worry about anything else, just pay that off. And once I got excited about that, and I was like, oh, let me get this car done, let me get everything else. But it was one little thing. So set a goal and start with that. Choose an approach to budget. I like that approach because there is no one size fits all. There is no specific thing that because it worked for me, it's going to work for you. My thing was a credit card thing. Your thing might be a medical bill thing, or trying to get a hold of a mortgage thing, or whatever, or rent, or whatever the case may be. But choose an appropriate budgeting methodology for you. Get a handle on your current cash flow. People do all kinds of things. I had a roommate once who used to, and this is a system I know would not work for me, but he had 10 envelopes every month. And in every envelope was a set amount of cash for specific things, like my entertainment envelope, my rent envelope, my cell phone, and other, I thought, oh my God, I could not keep track of this system. No, in transparency, it was an envelope. So look, you take that envelope with you entertainment-wise, and when it's empty, it's empty. You know what I'm saying? But I thought, oh, I can't manage all these envelopes. But that was his thing. I'm more of an Excel spreadsheet. I like to go in and input the number for the light bill, and then see that number declining, and then stress out about it a little bit, but then realize, okay, everything is happening, and it's calculating itself, and I don't have to stay up on top of it. I downloaded my bank app, and my bank app unfortunately shows me my spending patterns every month. And it tells me what was food, and what did you do that was categorized as entertainment, and what, other people use things like Mint, which is another wonderful free app that kind of does that same categorization. Not to police you, but to give you empowerment and understanding, so that you start to think critically about expenditures. In the sainted place, I can say this. One of the things that I grew up with a home bar. My grandfather had a home bar. Everybody came over. They got unlimited whatever they wanted because he had a home bar. So I told you I'm following after my ancestors, so I got a home bar, and it's unlimited, and you can have whatever you want. And so one day, as I was paying $15 for a cocktail, I went, I got the same stuff at home. So I made a decision for myself that unless somebody else is paying for it, I will not buy alcohol outside of the house. They may think, well, that's a little, like, what? No, you do not know how much money that saved, because it was already there. It was one little shift. So if I go out to dinner, that's something that I don't purchase, because I'm like, I already have access to that, why would I spend money on that? It's little changes like that that get a handle on your cash flow. Build a budget. What do you want to do financially? You got your goals, you're thinking critically about your approach to budgeting, you know your cash flow, because it's really simple. As I said, even most bank apps now tell you everything that you're doing with your cash flow. Then you build a budget around that. And build a budget about sufficiency and not scarcity. Budget that's not about being afraid of every dime and where things go, but thinking about, what do I need here? What's going to make me vital? Some of the reason we avoid budgeting is because our mentality is that it's going to be a restriction, and every fun thing, of course, is going to have to go to rob Peter and pay Paul and take care of somebody else, as opposed to thinking about an investment in you, and what does that look like? And knowing that there are ways to invest in you. When people want to travel in my life, they call me, because I will find you the best travel deal that you could possibly imagine. When somebody wants to go to a restaurant, I will find you the best deal in the restaurant. I should own stock in Groupon.com. If you say, hey, hold on, I go to Groupon first to see if it's there. Because I've learned there are ways to still accomplish what you want to do in a fiscally responsible way that does not limit you, but actually invites you. Last year, 11 of my family members, we all went to China for 11 days. You know how much we paid per person? $250 per person. Airfare, hotels, all of it. Because I was on Groupon, and there was this random deal for $249, and I called my whole family and said, we can do this. And so when I told my sister, my nephews were there, my grandmother, who was 82 at the time she was there, I said, we've planted a seed in my nephews about sufficiency and possibility. They now will think about the possibilities of their lives, other cultures. They've been stretched and imaginable. And it did not mean that you and my brother-in-law couldn't afford rents, and you couldn't move forward, and you couldn't do the things that you needed to do. Groupon.com, travelzoo.com. I just saw recently that trip was on there again. It's $349 now, but still, it's there. So thinking about building a budget, putting the budget into action, and then getting into a habit. You know, because what I really thought is, okay, once this credit card bill is done, I'm going to go back to doing exactly what I was doing. And so she encouraged me, get another goal. Keep coming up with a new goal. Once you accomplish one, put something else on the docket so that you have something consistent that you are comfortable with working towards. So part of my budget is predicated for me on that. I have a goal each year of something I want to do, something I want to accomplish, where I want to go. So I know in my mind, this is what I'm working toward, and everything else is kind of filtering and coming into that. How am I on time? More or less? Oh, I was like, oh. Quickly for the salary piece. When you're talking to seminary and folks about salary, I kind of put these together. 5 considerations for a salary. A pay or compensation package is not the same as a salary. And keep that in mind. There are many resources to find out what fair compensation for a pastor should be. Most denominations have a compensation guideline, so that at least helps you in the conversation. Many pastors request no raises, but would appreciate one. Don't ask for them, don't bring it up. You're in council meeting, it just bypasses and you say, oh, okay. So no thoughtfulness about, actually I would like this. Many pastors are under extreme stress because they do not have adequate income to meet their financial obligations, and some pastors leave their churches literally because of pay issues. And so thinking about these things going into the conversation might actually help you with some leveraging conversations and negotiation. You know, I happen to do Search and Call in the heartland. I mean, a lot of rural churches. We have over 318 churches. Many of them are in rural areas where the churches really struggle. So churches started saying to me, so, Darrell, what if we paid this much in compensation and salary, but what if we put money aside to start paying your student loans? I said, okay, that's a different thing. And they said, we have some reserve money that, you know, is for a pastor's move and that, but could we put that towards their student loan? And so we hope we'll grow in this compensation, but in the meantime, we're going to be paying towards their student loan. I'm like, that's the kind of mentality that can help. But how would a pastor know to negotiate about that? What are resources? To ask conferences, many of whom, if you're in the UCC, have money available to help clergy with debt. That's usually sitting there because no one's asked for it, because they didn't think to ask for it, because they assumed not possible. So I tell folks, go in asking every possible benefit question that you can. What's possible about my financial debt? What's possible about my seminary resources? Are there any other scholarship monies I can apply if I want to continue education? Because this stuff exists. I work in the Nebraska conference. I would tell you, the monies we have for scholarship often is untouched. It's just sitting there. People aren't asking for it. We just had a board meeting talking about what do we need to do to advertise to give people money. I run a financial management program that will give an authorized minister $10,000. I have to tell you, I pull teeth to get people to apply. Fact. Just because it's just, no. Or we've been told there is no help. Few questions I'd like to ask folks to think about. Do I feel called to be bivocational? You need to know that, because that might be your reality. Health insurance, pension, medical leave, my student debt, regional considerations, identity considerations. These are all things that when you think about yourself as already well pleased for God, that you understand that these are valuable things to pay attention to. I like to educate clergy about hours, because we don't really know what full-time means, what three-quarter time means, what half-time means. I applied to a church once that offered me a call agreement that told me that half-time was 39 to 42 hours. I thought, well, what is full-time? They didn't even say quarter. They said, oh, this is our half-time thing. Because their mentality was only for a full-time pastor. So they had no idea what a half-time pastor meant. So they just put the numbers in of what they were used to. Time away. Ask. What is the congregation's understanding about Sabbath? What is their understanding about how many days you should get off? How much vacation? What is vacation? How is it calculated?
I have a question. So if you go back one slide. So Sundays off, so that would be like 9 for the year?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's depending on your situation and how that church really thinks about it.
Yeah.
But think about it, a full-time pastor is often in the standard contract given 4 Sundays off. If you're half-time, I might suggest that then you need 8, or you might negotiate something else. But it's thinking the numbers through so that we're able to negotiate and have critical conversations as opposed to just accepting a boilerplate. Pensions. If you're in the UCC, there's conference guidelines. 14% is typical, but I tell people do not accept a no pension contract. For most of our seminary graduates, the church will say, well, they don't really need to worry about that right now. And so the students will say, okay. Investing in a pension now has a number of benefits. If you're UCC, for instance, and you invest in our pension, you automatically get a financial planner. You get all these resources in a financial planning center. You get access with UCC Health Insurance for EAP, where they will give you free counseling. If you need 6 sessions of that, they'll do research on mortgages for you. They'll take care of all of these things that stress us out. They even give you consultations for legal issues, financial issues, a host of other things. But most of our pastors will go, well, okay, it's okay. I'll try it next time. Be upfront about your needs, value your self-care. There are typically denominational and other cost-effective plans. The UCC, for instance, just came out with a high deductible plan. That's something that newer clergy right out of seminary, oh yes, give me that high deductible plan. I think I'm going to be okay. And then something major happens. And that high deductible plan is as if you don't have insurance at all. So thinking through what makes sense. Even if the church is telling you, well, just do a high deductible plan. It's less money for us. Does that fit your particular medical needs or desires? If you're family planning and all these kind of things.
No.
This thing is not like me today.
I'll get here.
Thank you. Regional identity concerns. I am a black man that moved to Nebraska. Twice, thank you, Sonia. So, I mean, I'll just be transparent with you. My conference has a lawyer that is dedicated to me that I can call if I get stopped by the cops, if something happens where I'm unsafe, but that was a part of the consideration. You're having a person of color move to the state of Nebraska, driving in rural area, so that was a part of it. They said, oh, okay, well, we will have our conference lawyer, like you know that you can call them, and they will be prepared to help you with any civil rights or racial or anything else that you get in. I had to consider that. Can I imagine having a happy and stable life? Which is very different. Oh my God, this church gave me a call. I'm like, oh, no matter what. Does this church accept all of who I was created to be? I have too many pastors who are hiding a part of who they are, or silencing a part of their identity or their belief system or anything because they just were so concerned about getting that call that they were willing to do anything. Especially sometimes, to be transparent, the wealthier church, the more, the church that can actually afford a full salary and all that, it's in those places that pastors are definitely like, I had an associate pastor tell me, well, the only time we really have a social justice sermon in my church is when I preach, because the pastor says it's better for you to take a risk because you're just the associate. So, almost done. Can you help me? Resources. Some quick resources if you want to take a picture of that. Money and Meaning of Faith by Jacob Needleman. Money and Faith, The Search for Enough. The Soul of Money. If you're going to start with something, I would suggest Lynn Twist's The Soul of Money. It's a nice, quick read and very thoughtful. The Art of Money, a life-changing guide to financial happiness. And this can be available. I'll make sure the PowerPoint is available. And then lastly, this prayer. Can we say this together? I ask for strength, and God gave me difficulties to make